Hey, what's up? It's Phoenix and welcome back to my channel. I encourage you to subscribe to my channel for more quality content. I encourage you to hit that like button and to share with your friends. I hope that you're doing well today, and I hope that my video can inspire you, and I hope that my video can make life just a little bit better in some way. Definitely check out my other videos, especially in this time that we are in. And I encourage you to check out the playlist tab, which will have other videos that I have completed. And I encourage you to check them out. Also, I wrote an essay that is going to accompany this talk. You can find that essay on my blog. I will put the link in the description. And without further ado, let's dive right in. Today, I'm going to talk about how I became a writer. And I'm very excited to be able to talk about this. It definitely keeps me very much enthusiastic. As you can imagine, writing has been probably the single most important and influential outlet that I have, and has taught me so much throughout my life and has made my life better in so many ways. So how did I become a writer? Well, first off, I realized that I wanted to be a writer in 3rd grade. I had just written a book called Twisted Brothers, and I remember writing that book. The story was about 2 snakes that tangle together, and that because they're fighting all the time, and that have to work together to be able to untangle and to overcome a villain, to defeat a villain that is tormenting them. And I remember writing the story and feeling very proud of it. And I remember telling my class, that including parents, that I wanted to be a writer, and this has always stuck with me. I always remember this when I have wanted to give up, when I have been discouraged, when I have thought that my writing is useless, and I remind myself of this instance in time of where I was determined to write and that I was determined to tell my story. It is definitely something that I have remembered through time. Now, that was the genesis, I would describe, of me wanting to really be a writer, but I didn't really know what writing was until at least 5th grade, when I literally started writing my first novel, Journey to the End of the World, and I was handwriting this, and I had no idea what it was going to become, and I had no idea what it was going to be, but it was a story that I wanted to tell and that I needed to tell. 5th grade for me was easily one of my toughest years, because so much was going on in my life. I felt like a loser, I felt like nobody liked me, and writing was a way of conveying all of these deep things that I was feeling, these deep emotions and ideas that I had. And it gave me a lot of hope. And so I remember handwriting the story, and I never finished it, but I remember handwriting it, and I remember just how much it gave me hope at the time. I remember starting to write it when I was in a car with my parents and my sister, and how I just had to do it. My writing continued to evolve until about 7th grade. For literally at least 3 years, I was trying to tell the same story, which was Journey to the End of the World, but it kept changing on me, and I kept rewriting it, and I never finished a draft. And to make it even worse, I eventually lost all of this writing. But it nonetheless formed what I wanted to do. Around the time of junior high, I was very interested in Stephen King, and I thought that Stephen King had an interesting style that I wanted to convey, and the horror was an outlet for me for being able to convey dark, deep, and ugly truths. And even though all of that was unfinished work, and it is lost work, it still nonetheless influenced me with what I was doing, and it definitely gave me a lot of encouragement to keep going. At this time I was writing a lot of horror, but in around high school, after a number of different experiences, I got interested in the writings of William Faulkner, particularly with The Sound and the Fury. I found that book at a thrift store, and I really liked reading it, and I loved the story, and I had never encountered that before. I was going to find out later that William Faulkner was a modernist and an experimental writer, and I didn't know what those things meant, but I was starting to learn about those things. And I think it was the unconventional nature of that book and the very raw and emotional storytelling that really piqued my interest, and that helped me to begin to realize what writing can do. I also remember picking up the poetry of Wallace Stevens, who I found out was a lawyer but also a poet. And I hadn't really read a lot of poetry at this time, but when I discovered his poetry, it really spoke to me. I don't know why. I think I just liked that it felt like when I was reading his poems, I was experiencing something that wasn't very common. I was feeling something that a lot of people didn't talk about. And Wallace Stevens was also a modernist, and so he was a difficult poet, but I didn't really care about the difficulty. I just loved their narrative voice. I loved these two writers and the things that they conveyed. Now, throughout high school and college, I wrote a poetry book called Character, starting at least when I was 15, the first poem of which was Cops and Robbers, which I actually read on my channel, and you can find that on my playlist of me reading poetry. But I remember writing characters throughout this time period, and I remember being influenced by a variety of sources, ranging from Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, to Edgar Allan Poe, who wrote in the Gothic tradition, as well as Robert Frost, who wrote a lot of it was probably more conventional poetry because it had rhymes and rhythmic structures, but it was very interesting to me and very influential. I remember getting a poetry book called Sound and Sense, and this definitely influenced me to think about what poetry could do. And I was reading other books as well. So it was definitely a very rich period. I was reading Chaucer and so many classic and modern writers, and it was really a wonderful time. So I wrote Characters, which you can find that I've actually published, and you can find that on my author page on Amazon, which I encourage you to check out. And Characters is one that has stuck with me throughout the years. It took 8 years to complete. It was not an easy write, but it was one that it was a story that I had to tell, and they were a multitude of stories that I needed to express. Now, when I was 19, I wrote my first complete book, which was science fiction, fantasy, and what could be called probably psychological drama, which was my book Away from Home. I have not had a chance to publish this book yet. It is very complicated, a very complicated and long book, and I have not been able to publish it yet, but I'm very proud of this book. And Samuel Cowlin is one of the main characters in that book, and he has influenced me and my mannerisms and my behavior since the beginning. And I'm very proud of that book. It was definitely a book of strong, deep emotion, and it captured a lot of what I was experiencing with mental illness and with the changing world that we live in and with various things. Granted, this was over a decade ago, but that period in my writing still sticks with me. And I think about it all the time. Now, when I was in college, there was a lot that was competing for my attention, but one of the what could be described movements or genres or ideas and philosophies about writing that influenced me the most was probably what could be called experimentalism, which included the avant-garde, but also included texts that did not fall inside of the mainstream, texts that definitely broke with form and broke with formal traditions, and that definitely got me to think about what I can write and to think about what I can actually do with the form. Now, eventually, even though I still write experimental work today, whether poetry or fiction or anything that I might be doing in general, that even though it influenced me up to today, I have very much broken away from this tradition, because my theory in a nutshell about my writing personally is that I just write. I know that the writing could be more innovative. I know that it could be more intriguing to people that like experimental works and things that are outside of the box. And I think that that's important to a degree. I don't want to just write the same thing over and over again. And I do like the avant-garde. But my theory of writing, as radical as it may or may not be, is very much focused on expressing things, on having an outlet, on conveying things and talking about difficult ideas, and telling stories, especially telling stories. That is very important to me. And so I tell stories, and that is what I like to do. So that is my belief on that. And even though there was kind of elitism with experimentalism, I am very much doing my own thing, and I'm very happy with that. And I'm not going to change that. And I'm going to continue to grow as a writer, and it's going to be a really good thing. Also, philosophy has influenced me quite substantially. After I started to move on from experimentalism and even the avant-garde, I realized that I liked traditional philosophy, starting with the pre-Socratics and Plato, and moving all the way up to contemporary philosophers. And all of that has influenced me very much. And you can find my talks on philosophy on my philosopher series in the playlist tab, which I encourage you to check out. And there you will see how philosophy has influenced me. But yeah, philosophy was a different medium and mode from which I learned in school, from which I could use to express myself. And even though philosophy gets a lot of criticism for not being a valid form of expression and not being as useful as science, I still think philosophy is very valuable, and it definitely enriches my life. Now, in 2014, I published my first book, Silent Noise, and you can find that again on my author page on Amazon, and I love that story. I won't go too deep into it, but you can definitely check it out. And it was a story that kind of kick-started what I wanted to do with my publishing and what I wanted to do with my books as I publish them and continue to publish them and have published them. And yeah, I'm very proud of Silent Noise. It's a short book. I wanted it to be more concise, and I think it goes into some very interesting ideas about poetry and life and existence. Now, 2016 was a very tough year for me. There was a lot going on. I remember publishing Pocket Words, which is a collection of minimalist poetry that I have written, which you can also find on my author page. 2016 was a tough year. I wrote a lot of different things, and I was writing just to survive. That was a very brutal year for me, and I was doing what I could. But I got through it, and 2016, even though that was 4 years ago, has influenced my thinking on my writing, which is that writing really can be this wonderful outlet from which to convey very difficult things, such as our ideas or our emotions and feelings about things, and that we may feel, and I think that that's very valuable. I hope to publish more of my content from 2016, so definitely keep a lookout. Now, the last thing that I want to say is that I have also been influenced by metal, especially over the past 1 or 2 years. Even though I've always been influenced by rock and metal, I think over the past 2 years it has given me an idiom from which to go off of, and it definitely inspires and influences my writing. And it's because metal is unconventional, because metal is different, because it's not mainstream, and because it offers something that is not always immediately intelligible, but that is an outlet. And that's why I do music as well, as you may know from my channel. So yeah, that is what I would describe as my journey of being a writer. If I was going to say what influences me the most today, I would say that it is staying curious, exploring the world of ideas, reading as many books as you can on a variety of topics, and not giving up on your vision. I could have given up on my vision any time during this trajectory that I've described. I could have stopped being a writer, but I could never do that. And so I'm going to keep writing for as long as I can. So definitely continue to explore. This world is not safe, and I don't encourage you to be safe, but I also encourage you to find the things that speak to you and do the things that feel good and that feel right. I think that's very important. I definitely follow my intuition and my instincts when I'm writing and throughout this course that I have described. Definitely my journey is different from other people's journeys, and other writers may come to these conclusions or to different conclusions in a variety of ways, but I'm very much proud of the progress that I've made. And I still consider myself to be a relatively young writer, even though I've written at least 76 books. And I see myself as hopefully having a long way to go and having much more time to continue to tell my stories. There is so much that I want to explore. So yeah, this is Phoenix, and I hope that you enjoyed this talk on how I became a writer, and keep a lookout for further videos. I will see you next time, and thank you for watching. See you next time.